I'm Ted Levin. I'm here both in my capacity as a music professor at Dartmouth and as someone who's long been involved in studying, recording, curating, and presenting what I call tradition-based music. Not traditional, but tradition-based music. For the last decade, I've been doing this work largely on behalf of the Aga Khan Music Initiative, a program of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, which has partnerships and collaborations with many cultural institutions around the world. Contrary to the tendencies of some cross-cultural dialogue projects to universalize the understanding of artistic expression and experience, the Aga Khan Music Initiative aims to particularize it. We're interested in presenting not simply Muslim artists or Islamic art, but in meaningfully engaging audiences with specific artistic languages, styles, forms, and genres. Doing so requires what you could call cultural translation, that brings specialized knowledge together with physical and technological resources in order to enhance an audience's experience of the work being presented. In the realm of world music, one of the principal needs for cultural translation is the literal translating of song lyrics from their original language into a language understood by audiences. An audience that understands a text is more like an audience in the performer's own culture, and their heightened level of engagement is a balm for the performer. It does little good to print translations in program books, which are difficult or impossible to read during a concert. But following the example of many opera companies, I've been projecting translations as supertitles. One of the artists I work with through the Aga Khan Trust for Culture is the great Azerbaijani vocalist Alim Kasimov. The texts that Alim sings are drawn from Sufi-inspired devotional poetry written mostly in 16th century Azerbaijani. When you read the translations, however, you feel that these passionate texts could have been penned last week. I would have assumed that equipment for running supertitles is standard in major performance venues, but I've been surprised at the number of halls that look at your tech rider and tell you that they can't provide supertitle equipment, or that they can only provide it by renting it at huge additional expense to the artist, or they can provide it, but it's really clunky looking. Another technology I've used to enhance cultural translation is live video feed that provides audiences with close-up images of unfamiliar instruments, instrumental performance techniques, and of course performers' faces. In a large hall, live video provides a level of detail that's important for students in particular. Again, as with supertitles, I've been surprised at the number of halls where it's been difficult or impossible to do live video in a way that's not an unbearable imposition for either audience or performers. As for performance spaces themselves, a lot has and will be said about this. I would add only that from the perspective of a music professor, the ideal situation is when you can share live music with your students in an environment that's at once a classroom and a relatively intimate performance space. I like putting everyone in a circle, students and musicians together, rather than putting musicians in front of students. The next best thing to circles is an amphitheater small enough to create a feeling of intimacy. A sense of appropriate scale is such an important part of presenting any live music, but it's particularly important in presenting music whose delicacy or intimacy is lost in large spaces. The ideal venue for much of the Asian music I present is a large living room. But in the absence of living rooms, I like flexible spaces with superb acoustics that can accommodate between 200 and 300 people. We don't currently have a space like that at Dartmouth, and I know I'm far from the only person who wishes that we did. And needless to say, for world music, flexibility is key. If musicians are accustomed to performing seated on the floor or the ground, as is the case with much tradition-based music, then an appropriate surface should be provided, set at a height that guarantees clear sight lines for the audience and that is appropriately culturally contextualized. When I co-curated the Smithsonian Folklife Festival devoted to the Silk Road in 2002, we carefully designed an outdoor stage where musicians from Central Asia could sit in the traditional way cross-legged on carpets and cushions while performing epic poems and songs. The Smithsonian was very proud of itself for having come up with this special stage setup that provided perfect sight lines for the audience, good acoustics, and so on. But a few months later, while visiting Kazakhstan, I was summoned to the Ministry of Culture, where a deputy minister spent half an hour chewing me out for having made Kazakh musicians sit on the floor. "You embarrassed and humiliated our entire nation," he yelled at me. This was, of course, pre-Borat, and he could hardly have guessed the level of humiliation that lay just ahead. Well, as the saying goes, don't get mad, get even. And I'm sure it was partly to get even that shortly thereafter, the Ministry of Culture of Kazakhstan rented the Kennedy Center and Carnegie Hall and sent its presidential Dombra orchestra, adorned in glistening gold robes, to vindicate Kazakh culture. I should have learned my lesson from that experience, but I haven't. I'm still presenting musicians who sit on the floor, and I still believe it's the right thing to do. And I hope that presenters who work with such groups will try harder than ever to address the aesthetic dimension of presenting traditional and tradition-based arts, not with the aim of creating a simulacrum of the original cultural context, but with the aim of helping audiences understand that music is not an international language, that cultures truly are different from one another, and that working to understand the art and culture of other nations and peoples in the context of local values, attitudes, and beliefs is the best way to strengthen cross-cultural understanding. Thank you.